So welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Bonar Institute for Purposeful Leadership webinar series. And today we have a very famous and distinguished guest speaker, Mr. Tim Leech, who is the founder of I think you're the managing director, Tim, as well. I get all the titles mixed up, of Risk Oversight Solutions. But if you have been in the conversation from the beginning, you'll know that Tim has been working in this space as an expert for more than 40 years, has a long history in risk management. I'd like to just go over the format of our webinar series today. So we at the Bonar Institute for Purposeful Leadership, in our webinars, we love to encourage audience participation as much as possible. We dedicate the first part of the webinar exclusively to our speaker so that he or she can express ideas fully, and then we reserve a lot of time afterwards for discussion. At any point, though, during the presentation, the chat feature is always available to you, and you can submit written comments and questions. We encourage you to do that. And after the speaker's presentation, we can unmute our Zoom accounts and speak freely. And again, we enjoy having as many audience questions and audience participation as possible. That enriches the dialogue. So, Tim, at this point, I'm going to make you the host so that you can share your screen, and that will enable you to be the speaker. You'll be in full control. And I'm going to go on mute at this point so that I can listen and learn.
Well, thanks very much, John. It's much appreciated. And thanks to James for the invitation. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the Bonar Institute, I've been intrigued right from the beginning when I saw that James's effort was focused on purposeful leadership, because for those of you that follow me, you already know that I'm really big on purpose. Today was actually a historic day for me. I just this morning sent a feedback to the Financial Reporting Council in the UK, which is the UK equivalent of the SEC. And what I implored the FRC to do is, in their next update of their UK corporate governance code, to actually state that part of the purpose of a board should be to oversee management's risk taking. So it is all about what we're going to talk about today. So as I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk and spend the majority of my time on the goals of what I set out to do, and John alluded to it. It really started 45 years ago, at 40 years ago, almost, at Gulf Canada, where we proposed to the CEO that we, being the audit department, said, why don't we get the people that own the objectives to do an assessment of controls at the time, and decide whether they feel they're okay right now, or if there's concerns, what are they going to do about the concerns? And the CEO at the time, his name was Keith McWalter, he said, well, I like that. I like management accountability, and it makes sense to me, so let's do it. So it was not one of those long drawn out, 2-year, can we do it sorts of things. It was literally, we conceived that would be a better way than doing another 15 or 20 audits. And in particular, I was responsible for oil and gas loss control. And my view was, I could hire some of the best engineers, and we could go out and we could write very good, technically correct audit reports about what management was doing, what back in the day we called them significant deficiencies and audit findings. We wouldn't have any shortage of those, but my view was that wasn't the way forward, and I still believe that to be true. And sadly, the majority of the world audit departments are still writing up what they believe are management's significant deficiencies and material weaknesses, and I write about that quite a lot. I have now coined the term critical parent-child interaction, which I focus on as what traditional auditing really is, and we want to elevate that to adult. And my editor of my newest article that's coming out next month in Strategic Finance in the UK, I thought adult to adult was a little critical, so they changed it to peer-to-peer as the acronym for the more humane approach. That's okay with me. The editor liked the peer-to-peer over adult to adult. So that's where we're going to go. And then I'm going to very quickly just talk about benefits. I'm not going to cover all the slides, but the slides will be available to you. John's promised he'll send them all to all of you that have registered. And I'm happy, John, if you send them even to the ones that are going to listen to the taped version ahead of time. All right, so let's jump right into the goals. So I think I've already alluded to it. I suppose I was raised a Catholic, and I have some Christian leanings still, and there's an expression, come to Jesus. So for those of you that don't adhere to Christianity, apologies for the expression, but you know, that happened to me in the 80s. I was in internal audit for 3 years, and then I was in line management. And when I was on both sides of the table, that was when I concluded that sending a team of auditors into people that own and take great pride in running the business that they're running, that it really wasn't a great idea to have those auditors trying to write up what they thought were audit findings and material weaknesses and significant deficiencies. I just didn't feel right about it, having been an auditor and now running business units. And the slide that you see is the IIA 2023 lines model. And I was excited. The positive parts about the 3 lines model is they made it clear that management's role was actions, bracket, including managing risk to achieve organizational objectives. I was very happy at the time the IIA hadn't actually stated that with clarity. And then they went on to say that internal audit's role should be independent and objective assurance on all matters related to the achievement of objectives. So in my mind, that was a huge win. The IIA had not talked about the internal auditor's role with respect to important objectives in the past. It was implied in a lot of the standards. So big part of what I've been trying to do since 1985, and I had great success in the 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s. I brought on software called CardMap to do this. I had clients, giant clients all over the world, liking the idea of control and risk self-assessment. So I had a good run with that, and made a reasonable amount of money when I sold my company to Paisley, which was one of the 3 largest audit software companies at the time. All right, let's move to the second goal. This is a core visual out of COSO 2017. If you're not familiar with it, I like it a lot. I was also excited about COSO, and I've been mostly critical about COSO work products. Not this one. This one I was pretty excited. Paul Sobel was chair at COSO at the time. I like it a lot. I like the notion that this is about enhanced performance, that it starts with mission, vision, core values, and right in the center of the wheel is strategy, business objectives and performance. And so to me, this was a huge step forward. COSO's original attempt at ERM resulted in a whole bunch of people thinking that ERM meant building risk registers. And that was the 2004 version of COSO ERM. So when COSO came out with this, I was pretty excited. The ISO 31000 definition is of the word risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So both COSO and ISO, in my opinion, call for objective-centric risk management. Ironically, the majority of the ERM frameworks out in the world today are risk-centric. They're not objective-centric. They don't start by getting agreement what are the most important objectives. Next goal, John. So the other thing that I've been talking about a lot, and it goes right back to my days in internal audit in the early 80s, and then I was a manager in internal audit again from 85 to 87, and then I helped companies build and launch audit departments as the head of control and risk at Coopers and Lybrand. What was obvious to me from all of my work around the world is that the majority of risk functions and internal audit are supply driven. What do I mean by that? I mean that their customers have never told them with any clarity what it is the customers want. And the customers are the CEO, senior management, and the board. So when you have a supply-driven industry, and the industry is both is audit and the burgeoning risk groups that exist in some companies. They sure don't exist in all companies by any stretch, but certainly in financial services, most of them have been told they have to have a risk group, whether they want it or not, by the regulators. But most of them have been supply driven, pushing what they think their customers should want at them. And that was clear to me way back when I was an internal auditor. Most of the people that we were auditing, they didn't want us there. They had the misfortune of being picked in our audit planning process. And occasionally when they did, it was called a special project. And auditors in my groups, at least, were thrilled. Anytime they could go do a special project where management had actually asked for help, that was the plum assignment. That was the one you wanted, not the one where you were pushing what you were selling at the customer, but when the customer asked for you to help. And those were hugely sought after assignments. So we want to move both audit and risk groups from supply driven to demand driven. So that's been a key driving force in my mind, how to do that. So right from the get-go in CRSA, we would ask, what objectives are most important to you? Let's use it as the pilot objective. Something that's truly important that you really would like to increase the likelihood you achieve. Let's make that the pilot objective that we run workshop on. And so all of my focus has been on that notion of changing audit and risk functions from supply driven to demand. John, next slide. And the other thing is my first company, I didn't mention it, I don't think, but the name of the company was Card Decisions. And CARD was an acronym that I spent maybe $100,000 registering as a trademark in Canada and the United States. And CARD stood for Collaborative Assurance and Risk Design. And that was and is to this day my view of what you need to do. You're seeking consensus agreement on acceptable level of risks in pursuit of your important objectives all the way to the board. And when you get that consensus agreement, that the world is a good place. It doesn't mean that you won't not achieve an objective, but everybody has agreed to take the risks that they now see with some clarity. So consensus risk-taking all the way to the board has been a burning platform, I suppose, of all of my thinking in this area and making better decisions. So CARD Decisions, my software was called CARD Map. My first assessment tool was called CARD Line. The first tool to help people identify risk treatments was called CARD Model. So I really did get serious. My kids actually didn't like it, and my wife wasn't keen on it. She said that's not a very good name. And in spite of opposition from both my children and my wife, who were shareholders at the time, I said, no, I'm dead set that CARD is where I want to go with this. And I still believe that today. I may even ask Thomson Reuters, who owns that trademark today, whether I can have it back for free, because I still like it. So my children and wife may still disagree with me, but that's part of life. Next goal. So the other side of it is I have had clients where the audit departments cost upwards of 50 million and more dollars. There are large companies in the world that are spending well over 100 million, sometimes even 300 million on their risk and second line groups as well as audit. When you add up all of those dollars that are being spent, these are the large banks. Shell Oil was one of my clients where I think at the time the internal audit budget globally was about 50 million. I have clients where the budget is 200,000. It doesn't matter what the amount is. It's you're looking for value from those monies that the company and the board has decided to spend on an internal audit function and a risk group. A large percentage of quite successful companies have no internal audit departments and they don't have formal risk groups, but they run quite well because they have strong first lines that are really thinking about risks and how to manage them, and they don't have audit or risk functions. Unfortunately, the audit industry has never really done a study to say, why are some companies that have zero audit functions doing so well? So that's an interesting piece of research, but we want to bring as much value as we possibly can from those second line roles and the audit function. Next goal. After the 2008 crisis was actually the dawn of formal risk groups as we know them today. In 2008, some of you on the line may be even too young to remember 2008. But 2008 literally brought the world to its knees. The global financial crisis was so severe, and it was centered on risk-taking in the United States and United States financial products. So the 2008, the root of it was the United States. And after that, when all of regulators all over the world had to come in and rescue economies that were at great risk of bank runs, destabilized financial sector, the works. So what you see here on the screen are four of the fundamental conclusions of what went wrong. And if we look at the very first bolded point, that's still today. If we look at Silicon Valley Bank, you can pretty much look at these four principles and say, well, still wrong. Apparently regulators haven't figured out how to fix this. So think about the time, this is 2008, the conclusions were issued in 2009, quite a long time ago, so 14 years ago, and little has been learned. And my newest article that I've authored with Professor Parveen Gupta that will be out next month in Strategic Finance is a longer version of why is it that the world learns so little from the global financial crisis and what needs to be done to fix it. Moving on to the next goal. In Canada, I recommend it if you've never seen it before, even if you're not Canadian, no matter where you are. One of the better efforts to describe a governance framework for banks comes out of Canada's regulator, OSFI, Office of Superintendent of Financial Institutions. It's dated September 2018. What I will say about it in a very positive way, there are things that I think they've missed, but what they really nailed is it's the board's job to oversee management's risk-taking. I don't think they ever explicitly said it in very blunt, specific terms, but if you read this governance policy, which is a free download for anybody out there that wants to see it, you can see just how dominant the focus of Canada's regulator is on the need for boards to oversee the risk-taking of management. Unfortunately, they don't say the risk-taking related to key objectives, and it's been interpreted as building risk registers and overseeing risk heat maps. So it has problems, but it did hit some high spots that were good. Moving on. It's interesting, I've been reading tweets, and apparently that's Larry Fink there from BlackRock, and if you're not familiar, BlackRock manages the most assets of any company in the world. They manage trillions of dollars of people's money. He's on the ropes right now because he was a fan of ESG, and now he's saying, God, I sure can't use that term right now because we get beat up way too bad when it even looks like BlackRock is even mildly in favor of ESG. So I think this morning's tweet was he's backstepping or backtracking on visible support for ESG. But what BlackRock is all about is putting enormous scrutiny on how well boards are overseeing strategic planning and risk. So ignoring the ESG debate, and the reality is if you in your strategy you have no ESG objectives, you have no ESG risks. Because if you don't have ESG objectives, you can't have ESG risks. Your risk is that you don't have any ESG objectives, and that could be a risk that you need to consider. Moving on. All right, so the core elements, and I want to move quickly. This diagram is important because it covers the whole evolution of formal assurance from the 40s when the IIA was first founded. It started off that internal auditors were compliance-centric. There were rules, there were policies. You sent out auditors, they checked whether rules, policies were followed. So you can see that on the left-hand side down at the bottom. That was the earliest form of assurance. We moved then to some mixture of auditors focusing on whether management has done prescribed controls. And when I was trained as an auditor way back in the late 70s, I was trained on process-centric. The very first thing I learned at Coopers & Lybrand in my summer camp, when I first joined the firm, was how to flowchart a process. And when we learned how to flowchart a process, we had to pick what we thought key controls were. We didn't think about risk back then. We just picked what we thought were key controls from our flowchart, and then we spent a lot of audit resources testing that control. So that was an early form of auditor. And these are all described in IIA's handbook on internal auditing, 7th edition. It's called Sawyer's Internal Auditing. Generation 1 was compliance-centric. Generation 2, process-centric. Generation 3, risk-centric. Generation 4, risk management-centric. And the most modern form of internal audit that not as many of auditors use as I would like is now called objective-based. The IIA calls it Gen 5 of internal auditing. It's the most modern form of auditors' methodologies. Over on the right-hand side is what I've spent my my career on, which is getting management that owns the objectives to take responsibility. And you can use the other 4 methods with management self-assessment. I used to have to fill out checklists as the manager of oil accounting. I used to have to say, did I do this? Did I do that? Did I do this? That's a form of compliance-centric self-assessment. But what I promote is objective-centric management. I call it strong first line. The people that own the objective are the people that do the assessments. Okay, moving on. The 5 steps, and all of these diagrams are freely available as a free download on the resources page of our website. It's dead simple to move to objective-centric risk and certainty management. 5 easy steps. Get your leadership to decide what are your entity, we call the mission-critical objectives, your top strategic value creation and value preservation objectives. Decide what they are. These are the objectives that are worth elevating to conscious. Daniel Kahneman calls it brain system 2. We're going to think about these at a more systematic level than intuitive experiential, which is brain system 1 in Kahneman speak. So that's step 1. Step 2, who's going to be the person that's assigned ownership to assess on the state of risk? What level of risk assessment rigor is our target, ranging from an hour to 3 months of fully the most sophisticated risk assessment tools and techniques? And do we, the board, want any independent assurance on the information we get on the state of risk related to those objectives? Step 2. Step 3, make sure the board buys in to this, what's happened in step 1 and step 2. We now have demand-driven internal audit and ERM. So literally, once we've executed step 3, we have changed risk functions and audit from supply-driven to demand-driven. Step 4, we go out and execute. We do the risk assessments at the target level of a rigor with the target level of independent assurance, and we report to the board. Next slide. The foundation building block, again, free downloads on our resource. I've been working at this since 1985. The first one I don't think even had a name, but it eventually became control status line, which then became card line, which became risk status line, which is now certainty status line. I'm still playing with the name since some people don't like certainty status line. We could call it uncertainty status line. What we're trying to do is avoid using the word risk, which causes people to go deeply into the ditch. As soon as we use the word risk, they start thinking, let's create lists of risks. So we want it to be objective-centric. I can't get into all of the details, but if you download it, you'll see this is an ISO 31000 aligned methodology. So internal, external context, ISO terminology, threats to achievement opportunities, similar to ISO terminology. Risk treatment strategy, ISO terminology. COSO wants you to use risk response strategy. Same thing. Those are the two analogies between the two leading frameworks. And what's unique to our methodology is this picture. We call it residual risk status certainty. It is a picture of the most important data sets we believe decision makers need to make that first decision you see there. Are we okay with the risks we're taking and the certainty we'll achieve this objective, yes or no? If the answer is no, you either better change the objective or fix your risk treatment strategy, because that's what your options are. And the next diamond, the decision diamond, is there a cheaper way? All right, so moving on. This is what I said about target level of risk assessment rigor. So the lowest level is nobody even has responsibility for doing it. It's not my job. So that's nobody's even assigned to think about what the risk status for that objective is. You'd be amazed how many critical objectives in companies have no owner today. It's shocking when I go out around the world. Objective certainty. Yeah, that could be good. Somebody's created an idea to rename it. Not rated means we have an owner sponsor, but they haven't had time to think about what their decision on the acceptability is yet. So it's waiting for a decision. Intuitive experiential, we can knock off in an hour or so. We go work with the owner sponsor and we give them 5 choices and we ask them what their decision on the acceptability is right now and write a few paragraphs to explain it. We are only asking for an hour of time of the owner sponsor. Knock it up a level, we go to traffic light, we can knock off 15 or 20 of the big risks to the objective and put red, ambers, and greens. Knock it up another level and we're going to complete certainty status line for that objective. That'll probably take a day depending on how complex the objective. Then we move to higher and higher levels of sophistication. We may be doing Monte Carlo simulations on likelihood of a particular risk. We may be doing deep dive data on consequences of a risk, drawing in local data, sector data, national data, international data. As we spool up on the amount of data, we might even go to artificial intelligence to help us with those risks. We may be consulting chat. That's what we're talking about here in the target level of assessment rigor. But we want that decision to be made by the leadership of the company. What level of rigor do they want on the data set? Moving on. So, and we also want the leadership team with board oversight to decide, do they want independent assurance or are they okay getting it from the horse's mouth? The horse's mouth is the person that owns the objective. Are they okay just listening to the vice president of sales talk about the likelihood they're going to penetrate the new market that's key to the success of the company? Or do they want risk to be involved, thinking about it with the VP of sales? Do we want any audit involvement at all on that? Historically, auditors have played virtually no role on the likelihood of achieving sales targets. It just hasn't been part of what internal audit does in most companies. Moving on. So we want to make sure we've got a full assessment of all of the risk treatments. And if you move to the next slide, we have a 9-category risk treatment principles. Again, all free downloads on our website. 9 simple questions you can ask yourself on each key objective. Have we communicated this objective clearly and to the people that need to know? Question 2, are the people that are key to achieving this, are they committed to it, or do they not care at all? Category 3, are we thinking about what lies ahead? Category 4, do we have the necessary knowledge, capabilities, and skills to achieve this objective? Have we got the direct controls we need to pull this off? Are we measuring how well we're doing on this objective in category 6? 7 is employee well-being and morale. 8, we bring in the full range of risk treatments, which include insurance, risk sharing, risk transfers on contractual. We're bringing in the full range of risk treatments you can use, not just mitigate. And 9 is who's overseeing that this is all coming together. We can look at that at an objective level, and we can look at that at a full company level. Behind the 9 principles, if we move to the next slide, we have 100 sub-elements that help risk specialists and auditors. These are the ways that you get confidence in your answers to those principles. All the ways you can clearly communicate objectives, all the ways you can get commitment, all the ways you can check your capability. And there's trigger questions, all of, again, available free download from our website in the resources page. Moving on, what's our goal? Our goal is we want the objective sponsor to make a decision. Which of these 5 categories? In reality, they're already doing it. When they do nothing more, they're saying it's green. So it's not as if this is capturing something new. This is capturing the reality of it right now. Of course, as we spool up, compliments to the Toronto Stock Exchange. They are the authors of this methodology. I used to use a 10-level system that I built for massive corporations. It was called a residual risk index. It's still available for really big companies that need to know, is this a risk status situation the board of the consolidated company that has 300 billion in sales needs to know, or is this just something the plant manager in Sheboygan should care about? So we found that we needed 10 levels for that, but this one is powerful, and it provides great summary reports for boards. Moving on, we have the ability to actually check whether the risk treatment strategy is optimized. That's checking on whether it's the lowest cost combination of risk treatments. One more, and it culminates in this. So remember the 5 steps. This is step 5. We decided what are the most important objectives. We assigned owners. We've got Mary and Chuck and Elaine and Paul, and they have executed the risk assessment at the target level of rigor and the target level of independent assurance that was decided on by the Strategy and Value Oversight Committee, which is the name of the leadership group we like. And bingo. And if the board wants to see what's happening in Mary Brown's world, there might be 25 pages of solid analysis behind why Mary has concluded that status is where that status is. So that's a very quick overview. The rest of the slides get into all of the benefits that exist. And the benefits are hugely important because you have to sell management on doing something they've never had to do before in a lot of companies, which is to take responsibility for formal risk assessment. So we have benefits to management, we have benefits to boards, we have benefits to auditors, we have benefits to internal auditors. I encourage you to read those benefits carefully because they are important to successfully convincing your company to move from weak first line, supply-driven, non-objective-centric ERM and internal audit to strong first line, objective-centric, demand-driven, which I believe is the future for audit and risk. All right, that's a very quick overview. I'm going to open it up now for questions.
I'd like to note we have some comments and questions in the chat feature, and I'd like to invite those persons, if you're willing and able, to unmute. We have Elliot Schreiber, Bruce McIndoe, and Yannick Michel Yannick to unmute their Zoom accounts. And if you can state your question, if you prefer I do it, I'm certainly happy to do it. Everyone has access to the chat feature. So Elliot, you were first. Elliot Schreiber, if you're available, but I can repeat your question if you want.
Thanks, Tim. I wanted to ask a couple of things. One is you've said previously that risk registers, the only people that really want them or need them or think they need them are the regulators. Your work is really essential for the board and for management. How do you change the regulators' requests so that companies don't continue to go through this risk register heat map nonsense that really doesn't help anyone?
Yeah, it's important to talk about regulators, and I think it's a really important question. The regulator influence is most dominant in financial services. There's no question that in that sector, that's. However, having said that, the UK Governance Code, when it was first brought out, said that boards should oversee risks. And that was way back at the Cadbury Commission. I think it was 1998, might have been the first UK Governance Code that what the UK created. And they're one of the few countries that has one for all listed companies. So they said boards should oversee risks and risk management. Boards, being quite logical, pragmatic people, said, all right, bring us a list of risks, we'll review it, and then we can tick that we're overseeing risk. So I believe quite strongly that the UK Governance Code, as well as COSO's first shot at enterprise risk management, caused a whole lot of people to think that risk management, not unreasonably, means overseeing a list of risks, not overseeing the likelihood objectives will be achieved. That in spite of the fact that the definition of the word risk, both by ISO and COSO, is about managing the likelihood you'll achieve objectives. So sadly, the world took a very, very wrong turn, but not unreasonably, given the roots. So when we hear the word enterprise risk, it thinks, well, let's make up a list of risks from across the enterprise, and then we'll show it to the board. And then we'll call it enterprise risk management. So the words that are driving the whole of the world right now, and I've written about this with graphics showing people going to the bottom of the ocean with a millstone around them, and the words of enterprise risk management, and worse yet, then create a department and call it the risk management department. So now the chief risk officer, we think it's his or her job to manage a list of risks. Got nothing to do with achieving important objectives. It's got to do with managing a big list of risks with only, I forget the mathematical, intangential or something. There's a math term for very obfuscated relationship to actually achieving the most important objectives. So this morning, when I sent what I sent to the FRC, what I'm really doing is trying to get them to fix what they messed up for the whole world by telling boards they should oversee risk. They have a whole section of the 2018 UK Governance Code that tells boards they should oversee risks. Boards, not unreasonably, ask for a list of risks they can oversee. but it accomplishes very little because it tells the board very little about the likelihood the company will achieve its most important objectives. So until the board asks for, show me a composite assessment of the risk/likelihood, unlikelihood, uncertainty, we will achieve our most important objectives. Think about it. Had the board of Silicon Valley Bank been getting a monthly or a quarterly report on the likelihood that the bank could meet its solvency needs under various scenarios. And I've had financial service, they should have been able to do that at about a 99% likelihood of scenarios that were at all like possible. So now, maybe the board did get that. Fair enough. That's what they're paid the big bucks to decide. And if the board decided that they were okay rolling the dice and that the depositors couldn't get their money and the shareholders would lose every cent of their shareholding, that's what the board is paid to do. And it's sometimes you can't vote the board out after you've lost every cent of your investment in a company. It's too late. But what I'm encouraging investors to do is say, is this board overseeing the likelihood mission critical objectives will be achieved? And if you're a bank and you don't think solvency is mission critical, I think your board and your leadership have to do some serious soul searching. Now, and if we take the McDonald's case and we say, is executive violation of sexual harassment corporate policy a mission critical objective? I think boards can arguably say, nah, I don't think so. But it's a debatable point, right? Given with the McDonald's fines and all of that. Now let's go to Wells Fargo. Can the board say that they had no responsibility to oversee compliance with laws for a decade? Well, that's what happened. They were fictitiously setting up accounts for customers for almost a decade. All kinds of information to that fact coming through whistleblowing mechanisms, departure interviews. So unfortunately, Elliot, the answer to your question is not a short one, but yes, the regulators, we need the regulators on board. They have messed it up and they need to play a part in fixing it.
Thanks.
So Bruce McIndoe, you had made a comment. Could you, about objective certainty status line, could you possibly unmute and elaborate on your observation?
Oh, it was more tongue in cheek for Tim around his evolution
all excited.
of his flowchart naming. I do have one that will have your attention, and that is, as I work with major corporations that have, I don't know, probably about what I would say, maybe 12 to 15 value generating objectives, if you focus on that. And, but what happens is those objectives flow down through the complicated organization, and they get, I'd say kind of cascade and then refined on like, what is that divisional manager's responsibility for the achievement, a component achievement of that higher level objective. So life has gotten more complicated, and I just repeat the process in an iterative way down the organization, but make sure that they report their findings rolling up to the corporate objective. Does that make sense to you, Tim?
Absolutely. And if you go to the 9 risk treatment principles, what you're talking about is category 1, the core question.
Yep.
Then when you go to the menu, you'll see how that cascades right from the mission purpose statement, if there is one for the company. Then we get entity level objectives, and then we get sub objective levels.
Right.
Those are all sub elements. And if you go to the trigger questions,
Okay.
and take it all the way down to the job description of employee number 8,025, do they have a clear purpose of what they're there for?
It's interesting you'd say that, because we're actually working with HR to look at how we can link this to performance review at the individual manager and team member ultimately. So that's a good point.
So go to those trigger questions for category 1, then go over to category 2 and say, look at all of the options available to a company to align the commitment of each of those people all the way to
Right.
the CEO, but also all the way down to the head of shipping in the plant in Michigan. Those are all key.
Yep. And their responsibility for continuing that awareness and reporting changes in risk profile, risk, threat to that, so that we're getting that sensing that will flow up ultimately to the overall objective. Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I just had this discussion with my client in Belgium that I was training. We were walking through implementation strategy with one of their key strategic divisions. Everything you've just asked was a part of our discussion yesterday. How do we take the division level objective and then decide how many of those are important enough to put into the objectives register?
And then in Tim, just because we talk about engaging all in increasing the certainty of our objectives, right? So the entire company has a role to play in this ultimately.
I see we have some questions on chat. The first one is about a company's risk appetite. Without understanding the company's different stakeholders, I think that's a great question. If you've read Elliot's book, The Yin and Yang of Reputation Management, you'll see that Elliot spends a lot of time about the need to identify who those key stakeholders are and to consciously try to understand what they see as value in terms of what you do for them and what you do as a company. So when we're creating the objective register, we spend a lot of time from a facilitation perspective asking a lot of the questions Elliot asks, which is who are our key stakeholders and what do they see as value? So the things the shareholders might see, well, a big piece of ESG controversy is a supposition that shareholders only see share value and dividends as what they see as value. And I think that's changing. And many shareholders do see a desire, they want more than that out of a company. They want to feel that they're investing in things, in companies that they feel good about. So the controversy is a big one, and it's certainly not a simple one because it sort of crosses the continuum of capitalism to, I think, excuse me if I'm wrong, Elliot, I think it's stakeholder capitalism, and you've used some other ones, and Paul Barnett has other great ways of expressing these ideas. But as we move towards these different notions of stakeholders and what they see as valuable, I can guarantee my daughter, when she, as the younger generations start to reach the point where they have invested monies, they are taking a way broader view of investment. And that's not to say they don't want to return. So I'm working with an incredibly, I can't say who it is right now, but it's a fascinating case study of making money and doing good. It's one of the most incredible companies I've seen that is living. It's going to be a lab of the whole notion of doing good and making money, and I'm very excited. So the notion, though, how do you know how much risk to take? It's not easy. I mean, when you're the CEO, I mean, just as I said, Larry Fink went on the record very publicly about being in favor of a broader mandate for companies he BlackRock is investing in. Now he's backtracking and trying to find a ground that he won't get shot every day by the snipers that are trying to take him down for suggesting that investment funds should be they should just be about shareholder profit and dividends. And so it's not going to be a controversy that's easily resolved. It's not simple. You have very powerful forces, particularly in the United States of America, anti-ESG. Even people like Larry Fink are starting to dive into the bunker because the bullets are starting to hurt too bad. It's not easy. I mean, if I was Larry and I was running a $1 trillion company, I can't imagine that scenario, but he seems to do it reasonably well. He looks like he can take the stress. That's what he's paid the really big bucks for, is trying to figure out how to dodge all of those. But in our methodology, if that, what I've just described is what are your objectives. Once you've decided those, though, in our methodology, the residual risk status certainty data set helps you decide whether you should accept that level, and that's your risk appetite tolerance level, or say, no, I'm not happy with that. Then you got to go back and change the objective or change your risk treatment strategy to increase the likelihood you'll achieve it.
So, Tim, we have a question from Yannick Michel. And Yannick, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Can you unmute and elaborate on your question about how do you quantify certainty?
Hey, Tim. Thank you, John. Tim, very big fan. I follow you on LinkedIn a lot. You, Sabrina, I think the objective-centric is the way forward. Probably has always been. I like those words. I put them in caps. Forward. I'll add one thing on the ESG that I think that most people miss. I'll add a statement, then I'll ask my question. The statement on ESG is, I think, the point that most people miss. People think about sustainability and they're thinking about more governance and environmental stuff. But it's really sustainability of revenue and sustainability of the ongoing nature of the organization. Because you can pay out as many dividends as you want, but if you go out of business next year, was it really worth it? So, SVB, for example, there you go. So it's not about sustainability, it's about sustainability of revenues and of the enterprise.
I'm with you on this. I'm just saying it's highly controversial.
It very much.
I'm sure Elliot is there with you completely too, and James.
So I have two questions, and I know we're close to the end of the hour. The first question is more so, I see that chart all the time where you show certainty, and it's obviously it's this color from green to red, and I guess my general question is, generally speaking, how do you generally quantify that certainty? And then my next question more so has to do with, I think Bruce touched on this. It's when we talk about flowing down the objectives down to, I think Bruce called it the stakeholder value, the value generating objectives. We can call it the objective centric aspect. How does that flow to actual management? Because the guy in shipping and receiving, the lady in accounting, they have a very specific job that they do, and it's fine. Whether it ties to the objectives is really the responsibility of upper level management. And I'll bring the example of Meta laid off a bunch of people, and they said, well, they weren't doing anything. Well, what did you assign them? So I guess more so the question of from an operating perspective, what do you see as the way to really hold various management to the actual objectives? Are there mechanisms that can help align what they say and are doing to the actual objectives that are stated and written down?
Okay, very cunning on your part. There's about 8 questions there, but
sorry.
I used to be a litigation accountant, and I'm still a litigation accountant. So I'm quite used to saying, just a minute now, I need to understand. Let's take those one at a time. So if we go back to your question, in our certainty status line, the box that is called residual risk status / certainty has 4 kinds of data. It has impact data. You can get as quantitative as you can possibly be. This is, what is the impact of not achieving this objective? You want to use stochastic modeling on the likely impact of the current performance on the share price? You want to get the viewpoints of every analyst that tracks your stock to determine the impact of not achieving, putting a huge environmental spill out into the Gulf of Mexico? You can bring in incredible sophistication on impact. Impediments are there things in the way, and what do they cost for you to be better at this objective? Again, you can bring in incredible quantitative sophistication on impediments. Performance, you bring in the best and the most sophisticated data you have on how you are performing on this objective, how you are performing against your immediate sector peers, how you're performing against broader benchmarks on that. I don't care whether it's carbon capture or take your pick, whatever the objective has to be. So you can bring in, again, incredibly sophisticated data to help those decision makers, or you can just put in the best stuff you can scoop in a workshop in 20 minutes. Concerns, these are the risks where you have decided you're not mitigating the likelihood or the consequences enough. Again, we can bring in incredible quantitative modeling on the likelihood of, say you have 15 significant risks that could impact that objective. You can bring in stochastic modeling, Monte Carlo simulations on likelihood, consequences. You can use the most sophisticated. I've had clients that looked after the nuclear armaments of the United States of America. So you're trying to determine what's the likelihood of an atomic bomb that you made in 1980 exploding because it's old now, like me. All right, well, we need physicists to talk about what goes on to the neutron structure in these bombs. What's the degradation of the armament switches in the parts? So again, we can bring in incredible, sophistication on likelihood assessment tools, consequence assessment tools on all of the 15. Or we might have gone with the gut level that most companies use on, are we okay or not okay? And you make your best bet. So you may, I don't know if you can see the clarity, but I have a big scar right here on this cheek. I have another one over here. I have 3 here. And if I was to show you my arm, look at that big scar. I got a big one on my leg too. That's because my dermatologist says if I don't remove these for $1,500, there is a chance that I'm going to get melanoma and I'm going to die prematurely. Now, I didn't ask him for statistical modeling on those 3 likelihoods, which is the one that's going to kill me, the one in the cheek, the one on the arm, or the one on the leg, which one first? And so you can ask, you can look at statistical, some of them he says, well, the government pays for these because the government thinks these are precancerous. The other ones, I'm just charging you a big fee because you probably don't like them and they look bad. So we got to use the best available data to try these, but I can guarantee you, if you look at those levels of certainty, assessment, rigor, the highest level, I'm telling you, involves incredibly sophisticated analysis of whether you're okay or not. But in the end, just like me, when he says it's $1,500 to remove those spots, I had to make a decision. Do I spend the $1,500 or don't I spend the $1,500? Now, in my case, I can run it through my company because I have a cunning scheme that I get a lot of this stuff paid for by the company. So I have to factor that in my decision making about risk acceptance. Now, I can also tell you, though, I was diagnosed with stage 3 melanoma, and my plastic surgeon had to take about a thumb-sized piece of my leg out. So I have to factor all of these factors in when I'm trying to decide whether to fix that little mark on my cheek. But that's real life. And when you're the CEO of a company, it gets a lot harder than Tim trying to decide whether to spend $1,500 at the dermatologist, whether he even goes to the dermatologist.
Well, Tim,
hopefully that now you had about another 7 questions, but I don't think we have time. But I'm happy to answer them if you send them to me separately.
I'll reach out to you via LinkedIn. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, we have reached the end of the hour, and I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your insights today. Fascinating. I've taken a lot of notes, and I also want to thank everyone who participated today. Thank you for all of your questions and comments. I will be sending out a PDF version of Tim's presentation. The PDF version will make the file smaller, about 3 times smaller than the PowerPoint version. So you will be receiving that. We will also make available a recording of the presentation. And if you would like to continue receiving invitations to Bonar Institute webinars, you can follow us on our LinkedIn page. You can also just email me. I will put my email address in the chat feature because some of you might not have it. And I will also like to direct you to the Bonar Institute website. That is another location where you can sign up for the Bonar Bulletin and be on our mailing list to receive invitations to future webinars. And it's highly likely that many of you who have attended today have deep expertise in purposeful leadership relevant to the board and the C-suite. And we would be interested in asking you to facilitate a webinar. We are trying to build a community of experts and interested people and create a meaningful conversation and create actionable insights. So thank you again, everyone, for participating today, and look forward to being in touch with you in the future.